So now that I have my background drawn and my paper stencils are all cut out, I want to start arranging them around my paper. And I'm going to start with the elements in the very background first, which is going to be the shapes in my sky because they are the farthest away from me. And it's going to go pretty high up on my paper because remember, things that are in the very background start off high up on the page. So I got my chalk pastel. I picked a shade darker than the color that I used for my sky so that it would show up. And I just drew along that edge of the stencil following the curves. And I'm going to do the same thing we did on our other stencils and rub up off the top of that paper stencil. So I'm rubbing with my finger in an upward motion, and when I lift this stencil, I will have a nice crisp line defining the shape of that cloud on my paper. And now I'm going to take one of the other cloud stencils that I made, and I'm going to do the same thing, drawing along the edge with my pastel. And I'm going to make sure that when I place other stencils on top, um, to rub off even more carefully so that I don't smudge the other outlines that I already have. So I'm using short strokes with my fingers. And really be thinking about your composition as well, because we don't want to have a bunch of clouds on one side and then none on the other. We should try to achieve a sense of balance. So just be thinking about composition as you layer more stencils and add more shapes or clouds in your sky. So here I've added more clouds and I feel like my very background is done and I'm feeling ready to move on to adding terrain or those mountains and cloud shapes. Now I'm going to put those in the middle of my paper because these are going to be, they're still off in the background, but they're more in the middle ground because they're not as far back as the clouds. So I grabbed my stencils and I made sure to wipe my fingers off in between. And I am going to do something a little bit different this time than what I did for my clouds. I put the stencil down in the middle and I want to flip it so that it's upside down. And I'm going to place it just like that, upside down, which I know might seem a little confusing at first, but you're about to find out why it's important to have it be upside down. And again, when I add my mountains or my terrain, I want to place it a little bit lower down on my paper because that's going to be the middle ground next. So I picked this red and brown for my chalk pastels, and I'm going to go along the bottom edge of my stencil this time, not the top edge. I'm going along the bottom edge because I flipped it upside down. And I'm layering the colors, holding down my paper with my other hand as I go. And like I said, instead of going up, we are going to rub down off of the stencil. So once I'm done layering, I'm going to not rub up, I'm going to rub downwards with my fingers. So I'm rubbing in a downward motion with my hand, and the chalk pastel is smearing downwards, which is exactly what we want. So again, do short strokes with your fingers to rub down, and when I lift this stencil, I should have the shape of some canyons or some mountains there. So just remember when you do your clouds, you'll rub up, but when you do your terrain, you should be rubbing down. So now I'm just going to layer and overlap to try and figure out where the rest of my mountains should go. I'm moving my stencil around on my paper a bit before I make a decision on where I want to put it down. So I'm picking this spot for my terrain, and I'm flipping it upside down. And then I'm going to use my chalk pastel and color in along that bottom edge of my stencil like I'm doing here. So just going along the bottom edge, and then I'm going to rub down. Notice how I'm not doing big strokes with my fingers. I'm doing small ones so that I don't smudge the other outlines underneath. So just little strokes with my fingers, and um, I'm gonna keep layering the other stencils and just moving them around on the page as I go. I'm gonna move them further down on my paper as well to show that they are a little bit closer to me. So the next mountains that I have, or canyons or rock formations, they are going to be in front of the others. So to show that they're a little bit closer to the foreground, I'm going to move it lower down on my paper. And again, I'm going along the bottom edge again. And when I rub with my fingers, I'm going to rub down off of the paper so that all of that color is where it needs to be. And I'm going to keep doing this and fast forward, and you will see when I'm all done. So now I have all of my terrain down, and I want to add some shrubbery or plants next. I'm going to use this stencil that has got a bumpy kind of shape to it, and I put it pretty low down on my page because this will be in the very foreground, and things that are in the very foreground are going to be super low in the composition. So I'm using this green and I'm rubbing it down off of the stencil again. And I'm going to do the same in the other corner as well because I want to make this look more interesting and balanced. So I'm just adding that green along the edge and rubbing it down off of the stencil so that the color ends up where it needs to go. And I actually think that I might want my bushes to be a darker green, so I'm going to add a darker shade to them just on the outer edges and again rub down. So if you feel like you're not getting exactly the right color that you want, you can always go back in, line up your stencil again, and add some more colors to it. And I'm layering some more over here, adding some more dimension by adding lighter color bushes behind the darker color bushes. And then I'm just taking my chalk pastels and using the flat edge there to add some final finishing touches by drawing directly on the paper and blending it again with my fingers. And there we have our desert landscape. Next time we will add details.